on here? What's the reasons that that these folks who seem to be anti-American, maybe they are, who want to put handcuffs on America when it comes to energy independence? And we're going to welcome to our program now Dr. E. Calvin Beisner, Beisner, scholar, author, and lecturer. He is the national spokesman for the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation, and he joins us now via the phone. Dr. Beisner, this is Tim with John. Thanks for being our guest.
Well, Tim and John, thank you very much. And thank goodness for Google every once in a while. I can answer your earlier question.
Please do.
Hanukkah starts on November 27 and ends December 5, so a total of 9 days this time.
Nine days of Hanukkah.
And about 29,000 years or so is about as long as it's going to take the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change to figure out that it's been barking up the wrong tree for a long time, blaming carbon dioxide for temperature change.
Hey, tell us, first of all, what your organization does, the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation.
Okay, we are a network of evangelical theologians, scientists, and economists who are working together to promote biblical earth stewardship, or what we also call godly dominion, fulfilling the mandate that God gave to mankind to fill and rule the earth in Genesis 1:28, and economic development for the very poor, think in terms of sub-Saharan Africa, and the proclamation and defense of the gospel of Christ, all of this in a world that's permeated by an environmental movement whose worldview, theology, and ethics are overwhelmingly anti-Christian, whose science and economics are very often poorly done, whose policies, therefore, often don't really protect and improve the natural environment, but do cause a lot of harm to people, especially to the poor around the world, and that has been intentionally infiltrating churches and trying to green the message, and really threatening to twist, to corrupt the gospel and wind up with a different gospel entirely, a gospel that's something like, if you love God, take good care of the earth. And, of course, if you love God, you want to take good care of the earth, but that's not the gospel. The gospel is that Jesus Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures. He was buried, and he rose again on the third day according to the Scriptures. That's Paul's summary of it in 1 Corinthians 15. So, we're trying to alert the church to these dangers, physical dangers, political dangers, and especially spiritual dangers, to show solutions to those, and especially to reach out to the poor and to the lost with economic development and with the gospel. We've got about 60 scholars in our network, roughly evenly divided among theologians and scientists and economists.
Okay. By the way, in your website is what?
CornwallAlliance.org. That's CornwallAlliance.org.
For the last 20 years, especially through the 90s and up to the middle of the last decade, global warming was, you heard about this all the time. It was in the news. Mm-hmm. And Al Gore became very prominent on the issue. And what we were told was, we, the general public, both American and the world, but in particular we Americans, that there was something called global warming going on the planet, thus global, the word global, on the planet, and that it was going to cause massive, interruptions in the cycle of life, if you will, on our globe if we didn't reverse it. Mm-hmm. And the reason that it was happening, one of the main reasons, was because of carbon emissions and fossil fuels, coal, and, basically driving your SUVs. So that was the premise that everybody was operating under. And then, so was that false? Can you want to take that on first?
Yeah, let's give it a try. First, it's kind of ironic that the period during which we have had the most alarm in the news media and popular culture about global warming, namely from the late 90s to the present, has been the period, interestingly enough, in which there has been no warming. There's been no statistically significant global warming since at least 1997, probably 1995, and possibly as early as 1991. The actual period during which some interesting warming occurred ran from about 1977 to about 1991 or 93, maybe 95 or 7. And that just, which of those you pick, by the way, as a year depends on which data set you're looking at from what kinds of instruments and what sorts of locations. But even the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which has been one of the loudest voices warning of dangerous man-made global warming, acknowledged in the report that it just released a week ago last Friday that, in fact, there's been no warming for at least the last 15 years. The reality is that most of the data sets say the last 17 or more years. So, ironically, we're getting the alarm when the phenomenon has at least paused for a very significant period of time. And what this tells us very importantly is that the computer models on which the IPCC bases its projections for future temperatures in response to CO2 are just flat out wrong. According to those models, there ought to have been at least 0.25 of a degree, a quarter of a degree Celsius of increase in global average temperature since since 1998 or 99. Instead, there's been none. And if your theory and hypothesis and the predictions you base on that don't match up with observation in the real world, they're wrong. So the models are wrong. They cannot be relied upon to project future temperature, and consequently, they can't be relied upon as a reason for adopting policy to turn us away from the use of fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas, to the use of so-called renewables or green fuels like solar and wind and biofuels. The fossil fuels are the most abundant, affordable, and reliable. The green fuels are the least abundant, the least affordable, and the least reliable. And switching would cause very significant economic damage. And there's just simply no rationale for it anymore, now that we know that the models are wrong.
So that it may have. So you're acknowledging that, quote, global warming did exist for what?
Oh, sure. In fact, global warming and global cooling go back and forth all the time.
Okay.
It's cyclical. It's a natural process.
Okay.
And I'd even acknowledge that human emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases probably have some influence on global average temperature. The question is how big an influence, and the answer that we seem to be getting, not from the computer models, but from actual real-world observation, is very, very slight influence.
Talking to Dr. Carl Beisner from the Cornwall Alliance for Stewardship of Creation. And so what do you think's happened the last, you said since 97, the planet's actually been not warming but cooling. It's just, I mean, if you're going to, I guess the global warming proponents like Al Gore, he's the most prominent among them, I guess, at least for the general public. What are their cause is dying out, isn't it? I mean, they don't, what? How do they claim that, we're having this serious, the Arctic's going to melt, and then we see that we haven't had warming since 1997? How do they answer this?
Well, a variety of different ways. For one thing, they will suggest that, some of the warming that we expected to happen in the atmosphere has happened in the deep ocean instead. Some of that energy that would have warmed the atmosphere had it stayed in the atmosphere transferred into the deep ocean. Now, it's a plausible hypothesis. That, too, needs to be tested by real-world observation. So far, our data on deep ocean temperatures are not terribly long-lived, and it's hard to make a clear, definitive judgment. But it appears that there's either no trend or such a tiny, tiny trend in the deep ocean temperatures that it couldn't explain all of the absence of warming in the atmosphere. But these things, science takes time to figure things out, and that's not surprising. For a long time, the alarmists simply denied that the pause or the stoppage of warming had happened or was happening. The reality is that it's most likely that global average temperatures are driven overwhelmingly by natural causes, such as the amount of energy that's coming out from the sun, cycles of ocean currents, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, the North Atlantic Oscillation, and other things like that, and even such things as the rate of influx of galactic cosmic rays, rays that come out from exploding stars, even outside our own galaxy, which is the rate of that is actually regulated by changes in the sun's magnetic wind. So all of those things result in a variety of different cycles of different strengths and lengths that result in warming and cooling going in cycles of different strengths and lengths as well. And it just looks as if from the mid-'70s to the mid-'90s, we were in a warming cycle. From the mid-'90s to now, we've been in a fairly level cycle. We're likely to be moving into a significant cooling cycle because of changes in the energy output of the sun that's going on right now.
Have you? I know you've been talking mostly here about the science of climate change and so forth, global warming, but do you also look into the politics of why? For example, and I'm not saying all people who are environmental activists are socialists / communist,
right?
But there seems a lot of people have suspected over the years that the reason the political motivation behind the quote green movement is to control America's economy, and because they're anti-capitalist and they view America as imperialist, and so the way you bring that country down, is by controlling it through making people think that they're the cause of global warming, and therefore using fear, and then you control, drilling for oil. You control coal. You control energy independence. You shut down mines. I mean, all these things. We know what's happened to the coal industry under the Obama administration. So, what's your view of the politics of the environmental movement?
Yeah. Well, that certainly, I think, is an accurate description of most of the leadership of the green organizations around the United States and around the world. Most of them tend toward socialistic political policies. They have a vision of government as taking care of us from womb to tomb, and they're not really concerned about the problems of the abuse of government power as much as they're concerned about the problems of the abuse of influence by big corporations. So that would describe, I think, a lot of the leaders of the movement. The grassroots people, the typical member of the Sierra Club or whatever, who pays annual dues to be a member and subscribes and that sort of thing. Many of those people, I think, are not really so politically attuned. They just think that their leaders are doing good things for the environment, and unfortunately, that's not usually the case. Most of the budgets of the 13,000 some 501c3 nonprofit environmental organizations in the United States today, with combined annual budgets of over $20 billion. Most of their spending goes to lobbying and to marketing, promotion of their ideas, not to actual efforts to clean up a polluted stream bed or reforest a place that has been devastated by forest fire, anything like that. So, the politics happens, and it does tend toward bigger and bigger government controlling more and more aspects of our lives. And the global warming thing is a particularly useful issue on that regard because, one, it's global. What I put out in CO2 here doesn't stay right here next to me. It goes into the atmosphere, and it can go all around the world. Two, it is rooted in our use of energy, and energy is what we use for everything that we do, growing food, making clothing, making shelter, transporting ourselves, communicating, everything. Everything takes energy. So if you can persuade people that our governments need to control our use of energy in order to prevent dangerous global warming, then essentially you've persuaded them that our governments need to control every aspect of our lives because we use energy in everything that we do.